We've got people joining, which is great. Welcome, everybody. We'll get going shortly. Do you want me to give people a minute as the numbers grow?
Yeah, let's give them a minute.
People arrive. Welcome, everybody. Hopefully you're all in the right session. Small towns, big decisions. What we're going to talk about. Nice to see the numbers coming in. We're giving a minute for people to join and then we'll get going. Right. I'm going to kick it off then. So, welcome to this World Water Week virtual session on small towns wastewater treatment and reuse. My name is Martin Gambrel and I'll be the moderator for this session. I worked at the World Bank for a number of years on, among other things, the challenge of water supply and sanitation in small towns in different countries around the world. We hope you'll find this session interesting, relevant and engaging, and you can help us make it more so by interacting with us via the Pathable chat function, where we ask you to post your comments and questions. That's not the Zoom chat function, but it's the Pathable chat function where you joined the session. That's where the comments and questions will be captured and our presenters will be responding to some of them. And it will also be captured in the recording then as well if you write there. So although there's no universally agreed definition of a small town, in most countries there's an understanding of what areas to classify as small towns, which are typically based on population size and density. But as you'll hear today, there are other characteristics which mark out small towns as different from rural agglomerations on the one hand and large urban centres on the other. The lower bound for the population of a small town is typically between 2,000 and 5,000 people, and the upper size limit varies even more, but it's typically from 20 to 50,000. Although you'll hear from one of our presenters about lower, smaller populations comprising small towns in Portugal. In any case, this segment of the urban population is rapidly increasing around the world. In Africa, for example, there are over 5,000 agglomerations with 10 to 30,000 residents, comprising a total population of over 85 million people, and it's growing. One thing is certain, however, small towns are a development challenge. This is the case for the provision of all manner of municipal services in such towns, but is particularly the case for water supply and sanitation services. This is because although many small towns administratively often have rural and often weaker institutions, the service delivery option for water supply is very often reticulated and therefore requires more robust service delivery institutions. And small towns consequently generate larger volumes of wastewater than do rural agglomerations. So this session is designed to provide guidance on sanitation decision-making for small towns where sewers make the most economic and technical sense and where wastewater treatment plants are therefore needed. This is not to say that there aren't situations in which the small town sanitation response is on-site sanitation or people-size management, of course, but we won't be addressing that during this session. We'll kick off the session with a presentation by the World Bank on its new guide for helping small towns select appropriate options for wastewater treatment and reuse. This will be followed by a presentation by Águas de Portugal about their approach to simplifying small town wastewater treatment system decision-making, design and construction. The ADP presentation will also talk about the co-digestion of wastewater sludge with other wastes. And finally, we'll hear from Sweden about research experience to co-digest wastewater sludge with agricultural byproducts in order to significantly increase the generation of biogas for reuse. And then we'll open it up the session to you all for questions and comments. As I say, please put your questions and comments in the Pathable chat box, not in the Zoom chat box, so we can keep an eye on it. So let's get going. Our first presenter is Jean-Martin Brel from the World Bank. Jean-Martin is a senior water and sanitation specialist currently based in the bank's Mexico office, and he'll present to us on the bank's new decision-making guide for small town wastewater treatment, on which he was the lead author. Over to you, Jean-Martin.
Thanks very much, Martin, and welcome everybody. I'm just going to quickly share my slides. All right. So let me first perhaps tell you a little bit of how this guide came about, and this is very relevant, let's say, to the challenges of the small towns. So we were working in Morocco a few years back, and they came to us saying, you know, we're a little stuck. We have our national urban sanitation plan or master plan that we want to roll out, and we know what we're going to do in cities, but we're a little bit stuck with what we are going to do with small towns because let's say and then perhaps I'm oversimplifying, but then they would ask us, you know, what do we do when we have engineering firms that come to us and say, we have designs for you for these small towns, which are the same that they were using for cities. And so they were saying, well, the small towns are a little different. We don't have the same capacity in site. We don't have the operators, the parts and sort of inputs for these small towns are difficult to get. Some of them are isolated, but also they're saying we're close by to mining towns or to agricultural fields. So perhaps there's opportunities there that we should consider when we start selecting appropriate technologies for our small towns. So this sort of sparked the idea of helping the Morocco give them a menu of options at the feasibility stage for them to have a conversation with these with all the stakeholders that are involved, particularly also with these engineering firms, to have some sort of a set of decision-making criteria that could help them really boost the development of that master plan. And so then we started developing that guide and asking ourselves, what are small towns and why are they important? And Martin mentioned a few elements of what are these small towns in developing countries, and why are they important? Well, particularly because they're in between these urban sites and these rural areas, so they act as the nexus between perhaps for agricultural activities, so they help bring the products that are produced in rural areas, bring them to the urban sites. They provide workers to urban sites, and really they are the connection between these two worlds, no? And some of the characteristics that you know, from our experience we've taken into account when designing this guide is that the sanitation planning at that level might be difficult because legal and institutions and frameworks are perhaps less defined, and as I mentioned, the capacity to operate and maintain infrastructure might be limited in small towns. Also, economies of scale are hard to find, particularly when you go for more complex wastewater treatment technology. So that's something to keep in mind and keep costs to a lower level or as low as possible. And as I mentioned, there are opportunities as well because of their position between cities and rural areas, and very often small towns are close to economic activities such as agriculture and mining. So there are opportunities for circular economy. They're reusing the wastewater, the treated wastewater, the biosolids. And so we went about, so, you know, this is first we've defined what are small towns, what are the opportunities there, and then but what would be considered an appropriate technology for a small town. And so we selected, and this is just to give you a sense of how, you know, how we went about, what's the methodology behind. So first we established we selected only well-established technologies to make sure that the level of complexity is kept as a minimum, let's say. New technologies that were considered were only the ones that are proven to be efficient and that are gaining prominence, and then not all variations or modifications of a technology were considered appropriate. And you'll see the list on the left. There's a list of 21 that we've selected. This is not exhaustive, of course, and you know, the idea behind the guide also is to give a methodology that is adaptable and flexible, and you can add and and take out some of the technologies so that it's relevant for your context. No? And very important here, the technologies that are included here for us should be kept simple, meaning simple to operate, that present low operational risks, and also that have affordable capex, capital and operational expenditures associated with these technologies. The guide presents a methodology of 5 steps. The first one is easy, as you familiarize yourself with the guide methodology. But then after that, what we recommend is to really convene all the key stakeholders in the small town that you're working in, or that you're representing, to discuss first the project criteria. So these are more qualitative criteria that allow you to assess whether first, is sewage feasible? Is this the right thing for your small town, or should you consider perhaps going for a fecal sludge management scheme, and which the guide doesn't cover, but this is a valid question to ask at first. After that, you take a look at the number of connections or the population that's connected. Are there industrial waste streams as well? Is fecal sludge going to be co-treated at your wastewater treatment plant? So you ask yourself all these questions, no? Regulations in place, what's the effluent standard that you need to comply with, or the reuse standards that you need to comply with? And in a very sort of qualitative way, is there enough land? Is there a flood risk? And is the power supply sufficient for you to be able to operate a wastewater treatment plant or different technologies, no? And once you've established what are these project criteria that are relevant to your context, then you move into step 3, which is to look at these technology criteria. We've established 7 technology related or environmental criteria, and then 2 financial criteria. And this helps you really start to eliminate some of these technologies, no, and to sort of narrow it down to a feasible menu of option. And that's really what step 4 is about, no, is you start saying, well, there are non-negotiable or exclusion criteria. For example, I don't want any technologies that have an operating cost above X dollars per capita per year, and then you start coming down to a reduced number of options, and you start assigning weights also to how important are these technology and environmental criteria versus these financial criteria. And with these weights, you have final scores that allow you really to compare these technologies. And again, this is feasibility, pre-feasibility level, but this is really what we wanted with this guide, is to have this to create the space for this conversation, give the decision makers the tools and the knowledge to have a conversation with engineering firms, with their own technical teams, for example, with other stakeholders as well. And just to give you an example, for each of the technologies, we developed this radar chart with all of these criteria. So we have treatment efficiency here, the ease of upgrading to enhance nutrient removal, which may be important in some contexts, land availability. We have labor qualification, availability of replacement and parts and operation and maintenance inputs. We have sludge production, energy use, and then operating costs and capital costs. And for each of these technologies, we developed this radar chart with the scores associated with each of these criteria. And we do provide as well, you can see on the bottom left here, ideas, let's say, of typical wastewater treatment trains that are associated with each of these technologies. So what are the other pre-treatment and tertiary treatment steps that you could add, so you can have an idea of a full treatment train after you've applied the guide. And I'm going to show you a little bit of what it means to apply this technology, or how you apply this. And this is the particular case of a small town in Morocco called Azilal. It's about 20,000 people. And for example, you're looking at the project criteria and the questions that you should be asking yourself when you start applying the guide at that step. And I think I'm not going to go through all of these questions, but some of them that are really relevant for this particular cases. For example, what is the water availability? What's the current level of consumption? And it has to be sufficient to sustain a wastewater treatment plant. Is there, for example, in this case, they had an industrial waste stream. There were nearby olive oil mills, and that waste was being sent to the wastewater treatment plant. So that adds to perhaps the needs for an increased capacity, or perhaps a pre-treatment step. Fecal sludge in this case was not an issue, in the sense that they were not going to co-treat fecal sludge with wastewater treatment, with wastewater. And in this case, they had no issues with land. There was plenty. And the same with the power supply. And then one thing to keep in mind here was that the effluent discharge limit was 120 milligrams per liter of BOD. So that allows us already to start eliminating technologies. And then you'll see on this next slide, this is exactly what we provide also in this guide. Is sort of for each of these technology, financial, and environmental criteria, we provide data that's been gathered around the world in small town wastewater treatment. For each of these technologies, we establish sort of a range that they can comply with. In this case, BOD effluent quality. We see here that there's this bar for 120 milligrams per liter. So everything above this would have to be eliminated. So now you're starting to get into this dynamic of excluding technologies because they can't comply with some of your project criteria. So in this particular case, again, we would eliminate septic tanks, biodigesters, and Imhoff tanks, as you see on the left side of the chart here. All of the other technologies would make it to the next step. And so we go on like this. Same here with labor qualification. We assign a score to each of these technologies according to these categories. So for example, for labor qualification, if you need several skilled laborers on site, then you would get a score of 1. So that's the case for extended aeration, activated sludge, sequencing batch reactors, and aerated lagoons, for example. And then if you only need 1 skilled laborer on site, then you get a score of 2. And that's the case for trickling filters and small rotating biological contactors. And then finally, if you only need periodic support from skilled labor, then you would get a score of 3, such as in the case of waste stabilization ponds. And so on and so forth for all the technical and environmental criteria. Then we get to the financial criteria, and it's the same logic. We do have cost information for all of these technologies. For OPEX, it's in dollars per capita per year, and for capital costs, it's in dollars per capita. And for this particular example, the stakeholders had mentioned, although they do have some capacity to cover operating costs with the tariff, they really wanted for small towns low operating costs associated with these technologies. So we decided that we would eliminate all of the technologies that have an OPEX score of 1. So that meant eliminating the 2 variations of extended aeration activated sludge. The 2 here that you saw in the middle that have a higher score.
2 minutes,
and the same, and the same logic for capex. So eliminating the capex, the technologies that have a score of 1, and that and what that left us, applying all of these criteria, that left us with this table that allow us to see. Okay, we've excluded most of these technologies. We're left with either waste stabilization ponds and aerated lagoons, and then a series of tertiary treatment steps that could be added depending on what you want to do with the treated wastewater and if you want to reuse it. And that's the end step of the guide here. You're provided with a final score for the technologies that remain, allowing us to make some sort of a comparison at the end. And then that allows you to conclude sort of that feasibility step, and you can use these 2 technologies to move on to the next step of the engineering design. And so to conclude, what's next, no, after this? So we've just published the guide. I'll show you in the next slide the link if you're interested. And the next step for us is we've been talking with Aguas de Portugal about transforming this methodology and actually complementing it with Aguas de Portugal's experience and transform this into an online platform to go a step further, in supporting small towns and decision making. And also I've mentioned the importance of fecal sludge in these small towns and the possibility for co-treatment. And so perhaps it would be nice also to develop a guide to help small towns select fecal sludge treatment and reuse technologies when it's appropriate for them. And again, I just want to conclude on the opportunities for circular economy that I've mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. There are very nice examples in Morocco where the small towns partner up with the phosphate mining company for both financing and operating the infrastructure. And this is very telling about the opportunities that exist at that scale. And then, of course, opportunities for co-digestion of wastes, particularly because small towns are closer to agricultural lands. No? And so we'll hear from Nuno and Emma in the next presentations on that. And so I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the session.
Thanks so much. And it's a very interesting thought set. What do you think of the guide? What do you think of the idea of an online platform with a similar decision-making process? What do you think about applying this to fecal sludge treatment plants? And what do you think about these circular economy dimensions that we're going to be hearing more about? If you've got any comments or questions, please put them in the Pathable chat box for us, and we'll come back to those. So moving on, we'll now hear from Nuno Brocco, the Executive President of ADP Valor of the Grupo Aguas de Portugal, on the approach adopted in Portugal to support the decision-making, the design, and the construction of wastewater treatment plants in the country's small agglomerations. Over to you, Nuno. You might be muted, Nuno. You are. Bottom left, there's a mute button on the Zoom. I think you're not muted now if you want to speak.
Sorry. I'll try again. Sorry.
We can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you. That's great. If you just share your screen, perfect. Yeah. It's coming. Great. Over to you, Nuno. Thank you. And again, any comment? Yes, we can see it. You want to put it in presentation mode? Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Fire away.
Okay. So thank you, Martin. Thank you, Jean-Martin, for the invitation to be here and to have the opportunity to share with you our experience on sanitation systems on small towns. I will try to, in around 20 minutes, give you 4 topics in this presentation. First of all, try to share with you what is the current situation in Portugal, and then have a brief overview about the 3 decades of sanitation in our country and the main challenge that we have faced connected with rural areas and also digestion.
You're not in presentation mode, Nuno, just so you know.
You can see in presentation mode?
We can see your slide, but you need to click on the presentation button. That's it.
Better?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry for that. So the question is where we are now in terms of water and sanitation services in Portugal. And to illustrate that, let me introduce, for some of you that don't know very well my country, we are a small country with 10 million inhabitants. We are a Mediterranean country. So we have strong asymmetries in flow regime, either intra-annual. We have also strong asymmetries in terms of demographics. We have almost 2 countries, one in the seacoast, one in the inland part. And for us, water regulation, it's important. We have important number of dams, like some other countries in the south of Europe. We share our main rivers with our neighbors, with Spain. And for us, tourism is an important economical activity. And some of you know Portuguese beaches that are very important for our economy. And finally, in terms of water usage, around 70% of our water is used in farming. So we are a water scarcity country in terms of water, of course. But giving some figures about the evolution of our services in my country, in the last 27, 30 years, we have increased dramatically these two indicators: population served by wastewater service. In 1996, we only had around 35% of the population. Now we have around 86% of population connected with public service, because part of them have their own private solutions. And in Portugal, tap water is safe, and 99.9% of the water is controlled and has a good quality. For this, Águas Portugal has been important. We are a public company. We have been founded in 1993, and we have the mission to design, construct, and manage water supply systems and wastewater treatment systems. And we supply this service to around 80% of national population. And we have an important amount of investment in assets, in physical assets. And you can see in the left side of the screen the number of assets that we manage. Just to give you one of them, we manage more than 1,000 wastewater treatment plants in Portugal. And going a little bit back, 30 years back, for the first decade of this history, and if I have to resume this in 3 key words, I will prefer to use institutional reforms, the scale, and the professional management. This was the 3 main key words for this decade. And 30 years ago, my country, we had a very poor service in terms of water and sanitation. Only 15% of the population was served by wastewater treatment systems. Only 50% of the water was safe, and around 75% of the population was connected to public water supply systems. And why? Well, the main reason was due to the fact that the water services was under the responsibility of the municipalities. They were, and they still are, an important number. In Portugal, we have around 300 municipalities. So you can imagine that the sector was very fragmented. At the moment, we had an important infrastructural gap, and we need to invest a lot at that moment, but we hadn't the capacity to use the funds that were available. There was, in terms of human resources, important deficit on talents. There was insustainability, financial insustainability of the services. Only part of the costs were recovered by the tariffs, and we had low performance and a lack of transparency regarding the service that were provided by the municipalities. So in 1993, our government took an important decision, maybe the most important in the environmental sector in Portugal, and the government decided to implement this reform, and it created a set of new instruments that allowed to create ADP. And ADP, it's a public-public partnership. So all over the country, we have different companies that are partnerships between the central government and the municipalities. There was an important number of pillars of this reform. One of them was the regulation. Other one was the aggregation of the municipalities in these different companies, and also the professionalization of the management of water in Portugal. So we have created at that moment in 1995 the first generation of these multi-municipal systems that was a partnership between the central government and the municipalities. And we have focused our attention in the critical regions of Portugal, the more dense in terms of population. We took advantage of having metro projects and master plans available for investments in those areas. And we have also the advantage to use cohesion funds from European Commission to make those investments. So at the end of the last century, we have achieved an important number of results. Important scales of economy was achieved. We had a great improvement in the water and sanitation services in these metropolitan areas. We have applied and well applied the funds coming from European Union, and the service levels increase, and we have implemented this full cost recovery model for our company. So this was a success, and in the next decade, the central government decided to focus the attention in the rural areas. And if I have, again, to resume this decade in 3 key words, I will use innovation, digitalization, and standardization, and I will explain you why. Like I told you, we have been succeeding in the coastal area of our country, and the second generation of multi-municipal systems bring us an important challenge, because the inland part of the country was so different from the coastal area. We have low population density, we have low income from those populations, the population was old, and the population was decreasing, and the topography of the region was very adverse, and the population was concentrated in small towns. So at that moment, 20 years ago, the main question was, how can we close the rural access gap to these sanitation systems? We, at that moment, quantified that we need more than 500 wastewater treatment plants to solve the problems in the rural areas in Portugal. Some of them, the largest part of them, are below 2,000 inhabitants. They will serve only 6% of the national population, but they will represent 20% of the global investment of ADP. So, like you can see in the table below, they constitute an important investment per capita, and this was critical for the sustainability of our services, but also the speed of the investment. We know that this will take too much years to be complete. So we decided that we cannot use the same approach that we have used for the coastal area. We need to boost the investments in these rural areas. We need to optimize the CAPEX and OPEX for these small plants. And we also need to optimize the management of these plants, because the rural areas don't have the roads and the access that we have in the coastal areas. So these were the main issues that we need to solve at that moment. And we have used a strategy with 2 steps. I like to resume in 2 steps. The first one was the standardization, a little bit what Jean-Martin told us in the last presentation. We have simplified the selection process for these wastewater treatment plants, even for those that are not specialists on the issue. And we have made all the pre-engineer needed for contracting each of those solutions. We have estimate, like Jean-Martin told, the CAPEX and the OPEX for the different solutions that we have decided at that moment. And we have produced for each of these treatment lines the pricing list, the drawings, the project specifications, and the tender documents. So this was the first part of our work. The second part was the digitalization, full digitalization. And today, everyone talks about digitalization, but 20 years ago, this was really innovative. We have full digitalized this decision tree. It's very similar to that one that Jamarta shared with us, with more or less the same variables regarding population, treatment level, available land, site characteristics, and so on. People introduce this in the platform, and they get from the other side of the platform the treatment lines that are applicable for that needs, the capex estimation, project specifications, and everything that he needs to launch the tender for the market. So this was online, and we have used this for the investment process in our second decade, like I told you. And in terms of achievements, we have made and we have closed this rural gap that we had in about a decade. We have, and this is very important, we have optimized the capex and the opex of these solutions, and we have controlled our engineering firms that were working with us, when we have controlled the creativity of them, and we have been successful. So last decade, after closing this gap and with almost all our assets built, last decade we have dedicated our attentions to asset management, to efficiency and resilience. And this is important because 20 years after managing different systems, we have an important number of variables that are happening and that lead us to an important decision. For one part, rural population keeps decreasing. New technologies are available, not only in terms of treatment, but also in terms of energy and renewable energy. Our infrastructures start to be aged, some of them with 20 years. We have now new challenge in our mindset. We have energy issues, we have circular economy, we have the question of digitalization. We have an important return of experience from 15 years of operation, like I told you. And the running costs, mainly for energy and sludge management in Portugal, doesn't stop to increase. But we have also other challenge like new discharge permits that are being updated by our environmental agency. So some 5 years ago, we took the decision to start a re-engineering process of our systems and looking also for new business models. And when I tell you about re-engineering our systems, I'm telling you about the conversion of some of them, for instance, wastewater treatment plants, convert them in pumping stations, interconnection of systems, and sometimes keep systems on standby mode and use other systems to perform the treatment. But we are also working in the extension of treatment lines to get higher environmental performance. We are increasing the treatment capacity to add value to our products, such as sludge. And we are also modifying the exploitation schemes of our plants. For instance, sometimes we have built plants to operate as an extended aeration with important amount of energy being used. And we are now switching the mode to operate them as a medium charge, decreasing the energy and increasing the sludge, then to have the digestion and to increase the biogas. So these are some of the alterations that we are now doing, and the co-digestion of external products with our sludge is one of the topics that we are now looking in order to increase our performance. Talking about co-digestion, and Emma will talk a little bit more about this. But ADP Group, we have around 30 wastewater treatment plants with anaerobic digestion for our sludge, of course. Some of those plants still have available capacity, so we can have some extra capacity to treat other products. We know that in Portugal, the industrial sector still have important environmental problems to solve, namely some effluents, and this effluents often has high organic loads. So these are perfect to have co-digestion with our sludge. And this is seems like a detail, but it's important. The treatment of industrial effluents in Portugal, in our concession contracts, are not regulated. So we can, of course, in a justified way, we can have a different price for this kind of activity. So we have here space for a win-win partnership and to develop a new business model. So for finalizing, what we are doing in this moment in terms of co-digestion, we have made a master plan to use all these plants in a global solution, for a national global solution, and we have already presented this to our government. So these assets are part of this national solution to solve the environmental problems that are being created by agri-food industry. Of course, this is one side of the story. The second side of the story is that we are using this to achieve our goal in terms of energy neutrality. We want to increase the biogas production in our plants in order to achieve this goal. And we are now proceeding to some small adaptations that are needed to receive this type of effluents in our plants. So this is the planning and the asset adaptation. We are also working in new business model. We, after some years of experience, we know that our utilities are not fully dedicated to treat this kind of effluents. There are typical small quantities. They arrive by truck. They don't arrive by pipe like other kind of effluents. And usually these are not the most attractive effluents for our utilities. So my company, ADP Valor, we have been appointed by our company to be responsible to mediate this, this business between the industrial player and our companies. And we fully believe that for new business that are not utility type, classical type of business, we need new approach and new mindset to be more fast, to be more competitive, to be really active in terms of business. The final two final topics, we are full digitalizing this process. So we are in this moment building a B2B platform that allow matchmaking of ADP availability and consumer needs. And when I talk about this matchmaking, I talk about geographical position, loads that are being asked to be treated, and also the treatment cost, because the treatment cost is dependent on the quality of the effluent that we receive and that we treat. And finally, innovation and knowledge. We have been working for some years in different type of projects, of innovation projects, trying to optimize our anaerobic digestions. So this is very important for our perspective to be updated in terms of what we can do to increase our capacity of anaerobic digestion. And with this, I told you that was around 30 minutes. I hope to comply with that. Martin, back to you. Thank you.
Certainly did, Nuno. That was great. You were under time and I really appreciate it. I've heard the Aguas de Portugal story previously. It's a fantastic story of evolution, reform, rollout of services. It's so relevant to other parts of the world, especially in lower middle income countries. So much to pick up there, but obviously with the focus on small towns, it's just great to see the way you're looking at it, the way you've been addressing these issues, thinking of different business models. You're used to your waste coming in through a pipe. How do you then work with industrial and agricultural waste that come in a different way to you for the co-digesting? And of course, some great learnings about how you rolled out small town wastewater at scale, and you did it by simplifying the process. Again, excellent lessons for us from many parts of the world. Thank you for that, Nuno. And for those of you that have questions or comments for Nuno, please put them in the Pathable chat. I've noticed that you have been adding comments there on John Martin's presentation. He's been answering some of those, so please do the same for Nuno while we go to our last presentation. So our final presenter today is Emma Kruger. Emma is a researcher in the Division of Biotechnology of the Department of Chemistry at Lund University in Sweden, where she's been undertaking cutting-edge research for over 15 years on anaerobic digestion and biogas production of different types of biomass, including wastewater sludge. So over to you, Emma. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. So let me first share the screen.
It's there, you just need to put it in presentation mode.
Yes.
Perfect. Yep.
Yes, and I don't see you anymore.
Yes, we can see.
My name is Emma Kruger, and I'm a researcher at Lund University, and I work with anaerobic digestion, mainly with anaerobic digestion of crops and crops residues, but the last years now also with sludge. I also worked a lot with integration with other biofuel production and with agriculture. So, so briefly, the biogas consists of methane and carbon dioxide when it's produced. So I will only speak about biogas produced from microbes through anaerobic digestion. And it can be purified to 97% and used as a vehicle fuel. It can also be used for electricity and gas and heat production and many other uses. 1 cubic meter of methane has around the energy value of 1 liter of gasoline. Liquefied biogas is very feasible to use for large vehicles, trucks, and also for ships. In Sweden, we are also around 10 million inhabitants, like in Portugal. And this is the energy value of the energy gases we are using currently. We have around 2 terawatt-hour biogas produced nationally and import around 2 terawatt-hour from Denmark. The total natural gas is only a bit above 10 terawatt-hours, which means that we could exchange all the natural gas rather easily with residues. Only from straw we could have around 4 terawatt-hours, and we are not using it at all directly for biogas. And the total residues could give around 80 terawatt-hours of biogas or methane. Sweden, the potential energy sources in different parts of the world varies. Sweden has low population density and a lot of forest. We also have relatively large agricultural land. So bioenergy is for us a good source of energy. We have a little bit less sun than in Portugal, for instance, or many parts of the world. We are also located just beside the Baltic Sea, which means that wastewater treatment is extremely important for us. This is a sea that has been eutrophication, and therefore we have very strict levels of wastewater effluent now. And even single families have high demand of effluent treatment. So the last year's large private investments has been done to decrease the nutrient leakage from households. We have an extensive biogas production from sewage sludge. Many of our cities, or we have many small towns in Sweden, and the population that is spread out. We have 138 wastewater treatment plants that has biogas production from the sewage sludge. And roughly 64% of these are in small towns with 5,000 to 25,000 inhabitants. Here you can see the total number of biogas plants. 138 are from wastewater treatment plants. And here's the percentage of the biogas produced. So only 35% is produced from wastewater treatment plants. So although there are many, the energy production is not very large. I think we have around 1 terawatt hour from wastewater treatment plants. And co-digestion plants is where industrial waste, food waste is co-digested with, also it can be together with farm waste. So far in Sweden, it's uncommon to co-digest sewage sludge and other substrates. Sweden is a little bit special since it has used much of the gas for as a vehicle fuel, where it's more common to use it for electricity and heat production in other countries. And we still apply much of the digested sludge on agricultural land, or 25%. And it's strictly regulated how much heavy metals there it can be to be allowed to be spread, and pathogen levels. So coming back to wheat straw, it's one of the largest agricultural residues worldwide. And in Sweden, it's estimated we can produce 4 terawatt hours from it when we subtract what is used currently for straw beddings, and if 25% is left on fields. Wheat straw has many similarities to other straws. I will talk about wheat straw today, but similar thinking can be done for rice straw, barley straw, bagasse, etc. All of these are actually grasses and share some similarities biologically. However, wheat straw and many of the other straws have a low content of many nutrients in relation to carbon when it comes to the demand needed for the microbes in anaerobic digestion. And adding pure sources of nutrients and pure water for digestion of wheat straw is neither economically efficient or resource efficient. Therefore, in this project, I will talk about, we have tried to co-digest it with sewage sludge, where we both have nutrients and water. In this way, we can assimilate more of the nutrients in the sewage sludge. And then after digestion, the sewage sludge is dewatered, so going from around 2% dry matter to around 23% dry matter. And the water left there then has a lower nitrogen content than without straw. In this project has been done in collaboration with 2 universities and the Swedish Association of Farmers and the wastewater treatment actor and combined heat and power producer. CSAV are combusting waste, and it's very closely located to the Asyd, who treats wastewater. It's actually the case in several cities in Sweden that these 2 activities are closely located. If there are, it's possible to use some of the steam from the combined heat and power plant for pre-treatment of the straw. And in this way, a special production of the steam is not needed to be constructed for steam pretreatment of the straw. However, if we want to choose steam pretreatment as a pretreatment method, we still need to construct a reactor for it. And coming to small towns and the selection criteria that Jean-Martin mentioned, this specific pretreatment will likely not fall within these criteria for CAPEX, OPEX, and skilled personnel. However, I will present some alternative pretreatment methods that are simpler. So this project is studies population of around more than 500,000 persons. So we start with some shredding of the wheat straw, soak it in acetic acid, press it, and then steam pretreat it. So acetic acid is the only chemical going in except water to the entire process chain and the wheat straw. We studied 3 cases, one with monodigestion of sewage sludge, one with co-digestion of wheat straw and sewage sludge, and one with monodigestion of wheat straw. And all the 3 different cases we digested in these kind of small reactors in laboratory in duplicates over 200 days. And for anaerobic digestion, it's kind of an expensive research because you need a long time to study these processes to really be able to tell if they are stable or not. We used 35% wheat straw and 65% sewage sludge based on calculations on the nutrient contents. We used mesophilic 7 degrees temperature and 22 days hydraulic retention time. That is the same time that is currently used in the wastewater treatment plant. To be able to reach this, the same conditions for all, we added experimentally some water to the wheat straw, some extra, which will not be done in full scale. Therefore, in full scale, you can either increase the organic load or increase the retention time. We did get a stable digestion without accumulation of short-chain fatty acids after 2 weeks of adaptation. And this is what you need to know to be able to implement it. Because unstable reactors are not a good thing. We tried a higher organic loading rate for a shorter period, but we need to study that more to be able to say that it's really for sure possible. The benefit of the low water content in the straw is that we can increase the reactor size with rather little and increase the methane total annual production of methane with more. So if we would increase the reactor size with 10 to 20%, it can give 33% more annual methane. And it depends on how much more we need to increase it, depends on the organic loading rate we apply. Both the sewage sludge monodigestion and the co-digestion did give a positive result. I will wait with telling you about the wheat straw. We are still working on this. On the first run, it did not turn out positive. And we also found that it's more economically beneficial to digest only sewage sludge than sewage sludge and wheat straw. Not in total income, but in income per kilogram of, or in relation to investments in the plant. And that is because we calculated with a cost of sewage sludge of 0, because in a large city, you still need to collect it, even if you are digesting it or not. So in this study, we applied steam pretreatment. If you have a large scale, you can afford to put heat exchanger and have a good energy efficiency. In a smaller scale, it might be too costly, which decrease the energy efficiency. So for a smaller scale, there are other treatments that might be better. I refer here to a presentation that is free available on the internet, but by Kurt Hjort Gregersen, who present different technologies applied in Denmark, where they actually treat some straw. We can use methane for different things, and in small towns, I would say it's common for smaller biogas plants to use the energy internally for satisfying heat and power demand. I looked at one balance of a plant at 50,000 inhabitants, the master thesis, and then it was covering almost covering the electricity demand, but not fully. This is our group who has worked with this project. Maya and Virginia has worked hardly in the lab, and Zelda has worked hardly with the techno-economical assessment. And I don't present very specific data so far because our data are not published yet, but they are coming out soon and in open access publications. I would like to thank the partners that has financed the project, the Swedish Energy Agency, and our two industrial partners, Viasid and SUSA. Please, do you have any questions?
Emma, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. And I think there's so much for us to think about there. And I think something that comes out of both Nuno and Emma's presentations is collaboration. And Emma is an example of that collaboration beyond those that we conventionally or more commonly work with in our sector who are used to the water and sanitation specialists. Emma comes from a department of chemistry, division of biotechnology, and she's brought into this discussion a lot of really important aspects of circular economy and thinking about these different dimensions and how they come together with our sector, in the case of small towns, in the case of sludge anaerobic digestion. So thanks very much for that, Emma. I think that's very, very provocative and very thought-provoking for us to think about, as Jean-Martin was saying at the beginning, the next generation of issues that we need to think about when we're looking at small town wastewater treatment. So I noticed that both Jean-Martin and Nuno were responding to the chat in the Pathable chat box. Jean-Martin has just shared the guide there, and maybe Emma, you can share that paper as well. You can paste it into the Pathable chat box. That would be good. So I don't see any other questions coming up in at present. There was a sort of overall, a couple of the questions asked about reuse, which links to Emma's last presentation as well. Jean-Martin, do you want to give us some highlights of some of the things you've responded to regarding these reuse dimensions?
Sure, and I think there were some questions on how is reuse included in the guide, no, and about the flexibility of the guide to welcome, let's say, new other technologies or other possibilities, and this is very much the spirit of the guide, is that we propose a methodology that is really adaptable to your needs, no, and so you can change the menu of technologies that you're interested in or that you consider that are appropriate for your context. You can change the weights that you assign to the financial criteria or to the technical or environmental criteria, so that you come up with a final score that is representative of your challenges or the context you work in. And it's the same with reuse. No, and reuse, the way that we've included these technologies, let's say the tertiary treatment options, is that we propose treatment trains, both for the liquid part and for the solids part or the sludge part, that are appropriate, let's say that are a good match, no, for your context. So we in that sense, you know, you need to, when you start applying the guide, you have to wonder what's the end use, no, for your treated wastewater, and then you apply the guide to make sure you reach that level of treatment, or you match these concerns by adding by looking at the let's say the options that we give you to create these treatment trains. No? So if you look at the guide, you'll see, no, the methodology is very flexible, and that's what we want. We want this to be useful and for any context that you work in.
Thanks, Jonathan. And before I go to Nuno, Emma, you may or may not have this information. It would be interesting to know if it's coming or not. But obviously, an important driving factor for us who work in low and middle income countries is the appropriateness of the technology and the costs involved. Nuno made reference to the per capita costs and how the smaller we go, the larger those costs on a per capita basis can be, and it's something we need to think about with our overall systems. Do you have any information on the costs, or will you be producing information on the costs of your treatment, your co-digestion treatment?
We will produce it and publish it. Yes.
Great. That's
so
good.
I don't have the per capita cost at hand at the moment.
Sure, but it's great to know that's coming, and this may be what you've presented, I'm sure, is of interest to Nuno as well, as he's looking for, within Portugal, new partnerships with these different sources of waste streams for co-digestion. So let me ask a question of Nuno, and I'm keeping an eye on the Passable chat box. If any of you have questions, please put them there, and we'll ask the presenters. Nuno, from this amazing evolution and reform that's happened in Portugal, and your approach to getting to the last mile, the small towns, and how you made the decision making and the costs, how you try to speed that process up as well. How do you see this in some of your work in other countries? How do you see this approach applying to, let's say, low and middle income countries around the world? What have you learned that we could try and replicate, or we could stimulate in other parts of the world?
Thank you, Martin. Yeah. We are currently ADP. We have an international branch, and we are working in some African-speaking countries and some countries in Asia. And one of the difficulties, and Jean-Martin started by mentioning that, often we found cities, small cities, the governments that know exactly what they want to do in terms of treatment systems. They have the money, but the process is very, very long. So the question of speed up the investment process is still at this moment for some incoming countries a very important measure. This is one of the topics, because even, and the World Bank knows this, even when the funds are available, sometimes the engineering firms that are working with the governments, all the decision process are too long. So the first topic is speed up this process. The second important lesson learned is about the creativity of the engineering firms. Sometimes they use the same recipe for large cities and for very small cities. And sometimes we feel that misses the ground experience. And with this kind of approach, and if you, like Jean-Martin told at the beginning, if you select a set of technologies that are easy to manage, that needs low resources in terms of operators, you can bring either the capex, either the opex to levels that you know that you can be affordable for that population. And finally, the question of this last topic about the facility of how we can operate these plants with low resources. We know in our case, and we operate big systems, but we also operate small systems. We know that human resources is always a scarcity resource. And in income countries, we know that that is a bigger problem. So from our experience, we need to incentivize these low-tech, easy exploitation solutions for other incoming countries.
It's a really important message, Nuno, and a very, very welcome one, again, from the various countries and settings that I've worked in. This issue of, firstly, speed obviously is important, but not speed at the expense of an informed decision-making process in which operation and maintenance of the and the local constraints for the sustainable management of the system are fully considered. So that it's music to my ears hearing about this. I think it's fantastic, and I'm very happy to know that Jean-Martin and you coincidentally have connected on this, and that our report has a lot of similarities with your report. There was a question in the passable box about whether this would go online, which Jean-Martin responded to. Jean-Martin, do you want to say some words about what you're thinking in that regard with regard to the decision-making tool and making it potentially more accessible?
Well, this is something that we've been discussing with Nuno for a little bit now, is that, you know, the next step is and Nuno mentioned in this presentation, you know, the importance, or let's say that they've gone through the digitalization phase as well, and it is true that it's becoming more of a topic these days. And so to make sure that this is accessible and easy to use, no, and so the idea is that, and I very much like the experience from Aguas de Portugal in that sense, is that, you know, they took it a step further in the sense that they have also provided some standard designs for certain technologies, for certain population thresholds, etc. And I think we should look into this, because that point on accelerating the process in a better informed way, I think, is a key one. And so I think what we're discussing with Nuno here is that we'd like to go that way as well, no, and see if we can help these small towns. And I'm not saying run through the engineering steps, you know, is rather help them get through it faster with you know, with technical support and experience behind it. And so I think that's what we're looking into, you know, is transforming this guide, this methodology, into a platform, an online one where you can enter the data. It can help you get to a menu of options rather quickly, and then perhaps provide some additional support on the actual designs. No?
Excellent. Let me take a couple of questions that are coming in the Pathable chat box now. There's one for Dr. Kruger. In middle-income countries, the capacity for monitoring biosolid quality may be inconsistent. What would your recommendations then be to maintain the stable energy availability from variable biosolid quality? I don't know if you have a thought about that, Emma, or not.
Yes, the first thing to think about is to make changes very slowly. If you want to have a stable digestion without too many analysis, then make changes very slowly. So it can be very tempting to have suddenly one truck with some separated fat, which can give tremendous amounts of biogas. But if you add it, the process will totally fail if you add it at once. So slow changes if you have a varying quality. And what some plants do in co-digestion is to have a mixing tank, so they take in different wastes and mix them and equalize a little bit of it.
Great, thank you, Emma. There's another question from Anjali as well about using sludge in agricultural use. I don't know if you have any information on this, Emma, but her concern being its effect on soil quality, given what the sludge consists of and heavy metal concentration and the like, that it might affect soil viability, fertility. I don't know if you have any
Yes.
thoughts on that. You did make a reference to it at one point.
Yes, yes, there has been long-term trials in Sweden with monitoring the heavy metals. I think that the cadmium content increased with 1% over the study period. I don't remember if it was 10 or 20 years of study period. Also, the copper, otherwise the copper content was increasing mostly. And that can also be good for many soils because many are deficient in accessible copper. But it's very important to have upfront work. During the last decades, the content of heavy metals in Sweden has decreased drastically due to upfront work. Also, we have pathogens and antibiotic-resistant genes and pharmaceutical residues. Regarding pathogens, it's reduced during anaerobic digestion. If we do it at 55 degrees, it's reduced more, very well in 55 degrees. If you pre-treat with 1 hour at 70 degrees, even more. Also, there are interesting new studies on our antibiotic-resistant genes, and even those are reduced more efficiently at 55 degrees and to a very high extent. So that was, I find it very interesting because that was most worrying, I would say.
Thank you, Emma. There's okay, I'm going to try and get to 2 other questions if I can, if there's time, before we're against the clock now. But there's a question from Tatiana, Jean-Martin, you might want to look at in terms of guides or projects on helping develop policies, institutions and regulations and financing framework that will incentivize and support municipalities in developing wastewater services suitable for their small towns. A really good question. And we hope that this guide is part of that decision making, but I'll let Jean-Martin answer that in the chat if he can. And then I'm going to, there's lots of other questions coming in now. We're not going to be able to get to all of them because we are up against the clock now. So there's one that I'm going to ask Nuno to comment on how did the municipalities respond to wastewater management no longer being their mandate? This is a very interesting, this shift in the reform agenda that you, in other contexts where decentralization of government staff and such centralization may not be welcome. Let me have a final thought from Nuno on that, and then I'm going to ask Jean-Martin for some quick wrap-ups before we close in 3 minutes' time. Nuno.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Well, that is a topic. You know, some of municipalities are very keen to release from this job. Some of the municipalities, mainly those that know the economical sustainability of this activity, they want to give us that task. Other still retaining this kind of activity. We don't have a single pattern in Portugal. We have in Portugal the possibility to get the privatization of the service only on the retail part, and the ADP usually act on the bulk part. So some of the municipalities in Portugal have already externalized all the services regarding wastewater and potable water. So there is not a single answer for that, but we are working, and the numbers, the figures are really elucidative about the gains of scale that we can get when we operate in this kind of system.
Excellent, thanks, Nuno. Okay, I'm going to give Jean-Martin a minute and a half for some closing thoughts from him as the lead author of the World Bank Guide and of the initiative within the World Bank to move this forward in small towns. I'm going to ask Nuno, Emma and Jean-Martin before they disappear to also, if there are any other written answers you could provide where you haven't in the Pathable, we'd really appreciate that because it gets captured for the recording. Jean-Martin, some final thoughts from you.
Thanks, Martin, and thanks, Nuno and Emma. Thanks for the presentation. Thanks everybody for joining. I mean, my final message is, you know, I've put the link in the chat. Take a look at the guide. I mean, we're very happy to have finally come to publishing the guide. It took us a while. It's a lot of work, but we do think that this is a space that needs a little bit more focus, let's say, because I think we've all worked in urban sites and in rural areas, and there's a lot of more body of work, let's say, and knowledge associated with these areas, but the small towns are in between. And I think really the motivation behind the guide at the beginning was to avoid these situations where you have technologies or solutions that are applied to urban sites that are applied directly without adaptation, without considering the context, etc. And this is, I think, critical to make sure that we can scale up or reach the sustainable development goals in small towns as well. No, so this is for us a critical challenge, and we hope that our guide and the knowledge that Nuno's presentation and Emma's presentation brought today, that will help contribute to closing that knowledge gap. No, and so this is the message I wanted to send, and happy, of course, if you want to reach out to us for questions on the guide, for anything related to sanitation in small towns, we'll be happy to respond. So thanks again.
Many thanks, Jean-Martin. Many thanks, Nuno and Emma, and to all of you for participating. Really appreciate it. And watch this space. We'll be back with more. Okay, thank you all, and goodbye for now.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.